Hi, Book 2 Bits Amy. I'm back again reading from the Anatomy of Bibliomania by Holbrook Jackson. We're on page 260 with a section titled Reading in Bed. A much anticipated segment here, I'm sure. But how many are there who neither wait to get up to read nor go to bed without reading? A notable instance is the Oxford scholar in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. For him was Leverhulme at his bed's heed, 20 books clad in black and read, of Aristotle and his philosophy, than robes rich or fitly or gay sautry. And that is obviously a bit of the poetry from Canterbury Tales, with some uncommon spellings for contemporary English. Certain philosophers have even gone to bed to think. Descartes used to lie in bed 16 hours every day, curtains drawn, windows shut, imagining that he had more command over his mind in that situation. And some others, as Malebranche and Mazzari, meditated and studied with drawn blinds or by candlelight. Many readers favor the night for the pursuit of their passion. The record for this kind of reading being held, according to Osler, by Sir Kenelm Digby, who I doubt whether he was a greater practitioner in this art than Liu Sun, that notable Chinese student who was so enamored of his books that he scarcely ever left them. He would read all night and make sure that he did not fall asleep. He had a lighted twist of hemp arranged in such a way as to burn his hair if he began to nod from drowsiness. Some are more temperate, reading a little every night before sleep, as a popular Lord Mayor of Dublin in Yeats, who bragged that he never went to bed at night without reading at least 12 pages of Sappho. But on the other hand, some resent the overtures of unconsciousness, warding off sleep as they would an enemy, as the poet Lionel Johnson, who would rather read than sleep. Sleep wins me not, but from his shelf brings me each wit, his very self. Beside my chair the great ghosts throng, each tells his story, sings his song, and in the ruddy fire I trace the curves of each Augustan face. Yet, whatever they say, all good and true book lovers practice the pleasing and improving avocation of reading in bed, says Eugene Field in his Love Affairs of a Bibliomaniac. So great is the inclination, which many account a bad habit, that some would have special books, imagined to be more suitable than others, set apart as bed books. These, they claim, should be soothing, passive, meditative, wooing the imagination, gently sedated, calming the mind, and so composing the body and spirit for sleep. And our late Regius Professor of Medicine at Oxford, Sir William Osler, a stout bookfellow, reckons up another advantage of reading in bed in a learned lecture of his not long since. With half an hour's reading in bed every night as a steady practice, he claims, the busiest man can get a fair education before the plasma sets in the periganglionic spaces of his gray cortex. But they miss the point. Your true bed readers seek neither to cure insomnia nor to educate themselves. They read for reading's sake, and would make wakefulness a virtue, to be cultivated not, within reason, denied. Let sleep go, let the morrow's duties go, let health, prudence, and honor go. The bedside book for me is the book that will longest keep me awake, says J.C. Squires in Reading in Bed, part of Life at the Mermaid. Reading against insomnia comes under the medicinal value of books. And I shall only say here that it is no more than an expedient and often a pain. Dr. Johnson lamented much his inability to read during his last hours of restlessness. I used formerly, he said, when sleepless in bed, to read like a Turk. But his desire was to sleep, not to read. The virtue of bed reading is that it enables us to extract the last drop of sweetness from this delightful hour, and to do so we must be conscious of our bed as well as of our book. Such reading demands an acute consciousness, for it is an experience nonetheless, because we end as though drowsed with the fume of poppies. For reading as an opiate, then, seek elsewhere in this treatise. Here are recorded only specimens of those whose bed reading is for delight. As Charles Dickens, when the other boys played, sat on his bed reading for dear life, as Leigh Hunt read Hudibras at one desperate plunge when laid in bed with two scalded legs, as Henry Bradshaw lay in bed so late to finish the first volume of Alton Locke that he was up only just in time for chapel, or as Herbert Spencer, when a youth, would read in bed forbidden stories, like The Castle of Otranto, Mrs. Redcliffe, and the like, until the birds sang in the morning, and as his old age, he would gloat on the memory of how his mother crept into his room to see if the candle was out, and how he was not to be balked of his midnight gratification, for close to my bed was fixed a corner cupboard, and habitually, when I heard her steps on the stairs, I leapt out of bed, put the candle still burning into this cupboard, got into bed again, and pretended to sleep until she, thinking all was as it should be, retired. Whereupon I brought out the candle and resumed my reading. This boyish adventure is very much to the point of my argument, for fastidious bed readers will read the books of their choice, and for their own dilection, as Chaucer when he anticipated Herbert Spencer by choosing a romance, although his aim was to entertain uninvited wakefulness. So when I saw I might not sleep till now late this other night, upon my bed I sat upright, and bade un reach me a book, a romance, and he hit me took away, or rather, a romance he hit me took, to read and drive the night away. From Book of the Duchess, our footnote says. There are, however, in spite of what I have said, certain books which by general consent and usage have come to be reckoned more appropriate bed books than others. But any catalogue I could make would be prejudiced, exclusive of all taste but mine own, or, if more catholic, so inclusive as to be useless as a guide for those about to read in bed. Yet although it is plain that reading in bed is an inborn faculty and natural to most bookmen, the choice of book blending curiously with the mood, there are doubtless principles underlying the choice, and if, as I have said, consciousness of the pleasure is a sine qua non, that pleasure must be so intense as to banish the desire to sleep irrevocably. Bed books must not disturb or rasp the nerves, and sleep being ultimately necessary, they should lull the mind into an exquisite slothfulness, fusing body and brain into a glow with sleep, waiting apart to be wooed willingly. The character of a bed book must thus approximate, as all art in the opinion of Pater, to the condition of music, which I plainly prove from the words of Hope Mireless. Let our book have some of the qualities of music, but they must be the qualities that music has for the unmusical. What we want are dreams and sound without sense. Our footnote pointing us to Bedside Books, Life and Letters, December 1928. Of all books, then, I take that kind which we call rambling and discursive to be best, and in this I find myself in agreement with Squire, who prescribes that they shall be neither boring nor too exciting, interesting on every page, but dramatic nowhere, and a stream of event, but no definite break. In short, I say, works of culture or urbanity, which may be opened and enjoyed at any page, as Boswell's Johnson, Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy, the Reliquiae Watenae, the Doctor by Southey, Walpole's Letters, Pepys's Diary, Greville's Journals, The Complete Angler, Montaigne's Essays, Evelyn's Diary, the Religio Medici, and the works of Francis Rabelais, Tristram Shandy, Don Quixote, Gil Blas, the Decameron, the Essays of Charles Lamb, Plutarch's Lives, all the manner of Analecta, the Depnosophis of Athenaeus, and the Attic Nights of Aulus Gellius, Edward Fitzgerald's Polonius, Frederick Locker's Patchwork, Southey's Omniana and Commonplace books, and the anecdotes of William King, Joseph Spence, John Nichols, and William Below, the Table Talk of Samuel Rogers, Leigh Hunt, Coleridge, A Bookman's Budget by Austin Dobson, Bibliomania, and such minds of curious knowledge as the compendious entertainments of those earlier collectors and classifiers of knowledge who preceded our more exact observers and recorders, as, and I give only a few of my own favorites, the anthropometamorphosis of John Bulwer and Lovell's Panzulocomineraliaja. Goodness, that's a long word. The Living Library of Camerarius in John Moll's translation, and Hawkwill's Apology. I would include all genial and urbane epistles, Lady Mary Montagu's, Charles Lamb, Edward Fitzgerald's, William Cowper's, and John Keats, the Epistolae Ho Illinae, the Groomsbridge Diary, and the pages from the journals of Mark Rutherford, Torr's Small Talk at Ryland, Doran's Table Traits and his other chatterbooks, Captain Grano's Reminiscences, but there is no end to them. And for poetry, what richer bed books than Golden Treasury or the Oxford Book, minds of purest English songs, the sweetest in the world, our best product, our true soul's vivactium, and such books in health or sickness, going to bed or staying in bed perforce, becomes a holiday upon which we may thank God for such a gift. God procured for us this leisure, quoting a line from Virgil. Not without good reason, then, does Maurice Hewlett set down in the limits of the readable that if ever he took a book to bed, which he ingenuously confesses he never did, it would be a good-humoured essays, not Hazlitt's. Hazlitt is for youth, which can stand his ill temper, perhaps be stimulated by it, but rather Lamb, a volume of the Tatler, or Bagot. You can pick him up where you will find him good-humoured. And Montaigne, a perfect lucky bag, but neither he nor I need much labour to prove this, for well have the wise ones of all times known similar delights. Sir Kenelm Digby records in a letter to Edward, Earl of Dorset, how being newly gotten into bed with the Religio Medici, he rejoiced that he could easily persuade that good-natured creature to be his bedfellow, to wake me, he saith, as long as I have had any edge to entertain myself with the delights I sucked from so noble a conversation. And truly, my lord, he goes on, I closed not my eyes till I had enriched myself with, or at least exactly surveyed, all the treasures that are lapped up in the folds of these few sheets. And with what delight must that be very worthy, industrious, and curious. I'll quote there from Evelyn's diary. Mr. Pepys have recorded how on December 12th, 1660, home and to bed, reading myself to sleep, while the wench sat mending my breeches by my bedside, from Pepys's diary, of course. Or again, cheery upon the thought of good business, with tea trice, he lay reading Hobbes, his liberty and necessity, a little but very shrewd piece, and so to sleep. Henry Crabb Robinson read the Doctor and Crabb's Life in bed before 6 in the morning. Voltaire was a confirmed lie-a-bed. When it was cold, he passed most of the day in bed, arising only when the weather was fine. When he walked in his garden or took an airing in his couch, his bed, says Dom Shandon, was always strewed with books, and beside it an elegant table on which was water, café au lait, an inkstand, and some slips of blank paper to mark the pages he wished to read again or on which to make observations. He wrote in the margins of all his books, criticizing, commenting, blaming, and praising, but he rarely read a work through except when deeply interested. Diana of Poitiers rose at 6, bathed in rainwater, rode a league or so, and returned to bed, where she lay reading till midday. Porson, Eugene Field gives out, was a veritable slave to the habit of reading in bed. He would lie down with books piled around him, light his pipe, and start in upon some favourite volumes with a jug of liquor at hand. Montaigne's essays and Howell's letters were Thackeray's bed books. If I wake at night, I have one or the other of them, he said, to prattle me to sleep again. Wycherley never closed his eyes at night without dipping into the pages of Montaigne, Rochefoucauld, Seneca, or Gracian. Edward Fitzgerald told Frederick Tennyson that he had read the 6th book of Lucretius in bed. He had not looked into it for more than a year, but took it up by mistake for one of Swift's dirty volumes, and having gotten to bed with it, did not care to get out to change it. And on another occasion he confesses to Bernard Barton that this morning I read some of my old friend Sir Charles Grandison in bed. Sir Walter Raleigh lay in bed of a morning reading Trollope. Francis Jenkinson, the Cambridge University librarian, read Mark Pattison's memoirs until 12:30 a.m. and became so absorbed that he continued reading them in bed until 2 o'clock. I invariably read in bed of a night, Arnold Bennett records, unless, he adds, paying in my temples the price of excess. He once took Montaigne with him for a bed book whilst on a holiday, but instead of the essayist, he found himself reading a verbatim account of a poisoning trial in the Paris Journal, on our footnote, pointing us to holiday reading in books and persons. But there is as much diversity of taste here as elsewhere, and even Squire, who I have also shown, prescribes those long, still books which are the true bed books, is himself a heretic, for he shamelessly confesses that, however tired he might be, and the whole contents of the British Museum at call from his bed, he would ask for a shocker. And here I consider in conclusion that there is no difference of opinion upon the pleasure of reading in bed, and that the true state of the question is only this, that the practice hath many inconveniences, mischances, calamities, such as injury to eyesight, destruction of the will to sleep, and danger of fire through mishap to candle or lamp. These be mere diversions, outworn toys of imagination, for I have yet to hear of any coming to hurt by reading in bed. But the opposition is as insignificant as the risks are negligible. And on that note, I may end, audita crulera, having investigated the objections. And that brings us to the end of reading in bed. At the moment, I've been reading the books of Laura Ingalls Wilder in bed lately. That makes for some very enjoyable reading right before I doze off in the evening. If you've made it this far in the video, do let me know in the comments below what some of your favorite bed reading is just before you doze off. I tend to choose things where I'm not going to be tempted to, read on to see what happens. And I do like, as he says earlier in this essay, I do like kind of those complex cultural milestone works like Pepys's Diary or Boswell to read in bed, because those you really can just pick up and read a page or two, be fully immersed, but also be able to set it down. But that brings us to the end of that section. We are beginning the next part of the book in the next video, which is titled The Influence of Books. Our first section there will be General Influences Considered, which I do think is a somewhat longer one. Okay, not too long. We're looking at, about five pages, 5 or 6 pages there for the next reading. But we'll pop the bookmark in there and end this video for today. And maybe you're off to read in bed. I certainly am going to be off to read in bed in a little bit here.